It was a 3-day furlough to Barcelona, and you couldn't get food unless you had proper identification. What to do? What the hell are we going to do? So we figured there's only one way to resolve this, is to find some big shot reporters or correspondents, and we already had in mind 3 of them who were hanging out together a lot. Hemingway was one of them, Herbert Matthews of the New York Times. So we started a tour of the biggest bars in the area. And sure enough, we bumped into them. So Hemingway invites us up to his room to have a drink. And my friend Jack Tiger ambles over to a closet. He opens the door. You won't believe it. Shelves full of canned sardines, chocolate bars with almonds, piles of best American cigarettes. It was like running into a gold mine. And Jack just opens up his pantalones and starts loading. I mean, fills it up to the hilt. It was so full he couldn't walk. He waddled. And Hemingway is looking at him in absolute amazement. And finally he says, "What the fuck do you think you're doing?" He says, "You can see what I'm doing. I'm loading up." I think I was 7 or 8 years old before I saw a large tree. I think it's when my mother took me to Prospect Park, which was in Brooklyn. And I couldn't believe what I saw, trees all over the place. And long, smooth carpeted grass. I went crazy. I rolled in it, and I ran in it, and stumbled in it. No, we didn't have trees, and we didn't have grass, but we had some things that people who have trees and grass don't have. There was an incredible sense of community. The very term Brownsville evokes to me a whole bunch of very profound emotions, not only as a memory, but even as an active force. It was like a vast human compost heap, the best and the worst that is human. My own parents were Russian Jewish immigrants, working class. My father came here as a carpenter. He switched during the First Depression and became a house painter. My mother worked as an operator in a sweatshop, seamstress. Life for the kids was street life. We played in the streets. But occasionally, once a year, a man would come through, a professional photographer with a tired little horse. And for 25 cents, you get a big picture and 5 or 6 little ones. I was in Brownsville, some of the dirtiest, fightingest, toughest kids in the city. And when I first appeared in a velvet suit, would you believe it? I remember it was a blue velvet suit with white sash around my middle, which my mother painfully made for me on her old single sewing machine. I could barely deal with the taunts and the teasings. Yeah. Look at him with his little velvet suit. Isn't he cute? And shit like that. So one day there was a big puddle of water up against the curb after a rain. I had this idea. I'll fix my mother. I just lay down in that puddle and rolled in the muddy water with that suit. After she got through paddling my ass, the suit was off me. It was being washed and dried and so forth. He put me back in that fucking suit. And I went down and rolled right into that puddle of dirty water again. I'm grateful that I grew up in a community where human beings were more valued than property or wealth or power. It was not considered tolerable to have homeless in our community. Whenever a landlord would put furniture out in the street because the tenants couldn't pay the rent, young people, and I was very much among them, would grab that furniture and take it right back into the apartment. The minute the cops arrested me, beat the shit out of me, I knew that I had engaged in some kind of political act. I didn't know the term for it. Looking back, I now understand it. I started as a young person being a radical humanist, caring about people around me and really wanting to do something basic and different to make life better. It was this radical humanism that led me to becoming a communist at the age of 16. After all, what options were there for a radical humanist in those years? Could I take my radical humanism into the political arena of the Democratic Party? By the way, there was no Republican Party in my neighborhood. I didn't learn about Republicans till I went to school. No, the only people, when I was young, who were doing something about unemployment, workers' rights, racism, were the communists. And so I was naturally drawn to this group of people who at least were explaining things and doing something about it. I was walking down the main drag of my community way back years ago on Pitkin Avenue in Brownsville, and I ran into a middle-level gangster. We had plenty of them. The community was full of gangsters and leftists. We produced a lot of both. I knew the guy, and he said to me, "Abe, I've been waiting a long time to tell you this. You are one shit-ass communist." I said, "What the hell are you talking about, Sam?" He said, "Look, you go around promising people that someday in the future you're going to redistribute the wealth and all that shit. Man, I do that all the time, every day. What do you think I've been doing but distributing the wealth? And I never fuck over poor people, not because I love them, they ain't got nothing."
He swept me off my feet. He represented something that I had never come in contact before. His courage, his involvement, his passion. I think his passion more than anything else.
I will not do anything politically that doesn't make me feel good. That doesn't mean it feels good to get hit in the head by a cop's club or to spend a couple of days in jail. But even that has a positive side. You must be doing something right if they put your ass in jail or beat on you and you haven't committed any crime. My first major breaking of the law is when I went to Spain to fight fascism. It was illegal to go to Spain. And I had to make a choice. There were some dangers involved. And despite the fact that I could spout politics and quote from Karl Marx, at heart, I was just a big, strong, overgrown kid. I was naive. When I went to Spain at 21, there was only one girl I'd ever related to. She was the girl that attacked me with a kiss. The young woman was 18, I was 21. On the surface, it looked like she agreed to my fighting for the grand cause, because she also believed it was a grand cause. But in fact, she was emotionally totally unprepared, and she fell apart as soon as I left. It was a disaster. In February 1936, the Spanish people elected the first democratic government in their history. It was short-lived because a few months later, the Spanish army rose in rebellion against a legally elected government. My first immediate reaction to hearing that a civil war had broken out in Spain was, fuck those Spaniards. They're the people who barbecued my people a couple of hundred years ago. And if they're out there to kill each other, great. The moment I thought that through, it was gone. And I immediately went back to an intelligence appraisal, because I had studied and read about it. There were two Spains in contention. The old Spain, the barbecuers, so to speak, the church, the military, and so forth. And something new was coming up in Spain, which opposed that kind of darkness, that fascism. And to such a Spain, I felt a deep attraction. I arrived in Marseille with a group of about 20 or 30 people. We called ourselves the Lincoln Brigade. The French had just closed the border, and there was only one way for us to go to Spain, and that was by boat. So the boat took off for Spain. It traveled most of the night. Some fucking asshole, political asshole, calls a meeting below decks which most guys refuse to go to, fortunately. And most of the guys that went to the meeting died when the torpedo hit. It was like a scene out of a movie for me. I remembered your boat's going down, you gotta be careful, you shouldn't get sucked in. All this was going on. So I ran out to the railing and peeled off all my clothes except a pair of shoes, because I was told it would be very hard to get shoes in Spain, and a wallet which had my girlfriend's picture. That's what I was wearing, a wallet and a pair of shoes. And I hit the water. Something very funny happened when we came on shore. The villagers were all out there with blankets and bottles of rum, and I get approached by two women, obviously mother and daughter. A mother and a very nubile daughter, I still remember. Yum, yum. And they have a bottle, one of them puts a bottle to my mouth, and I never was a drinker, and it's kind of hot, nice stuff. It was cognac, I guess. And the other one's pouring some alcohol in my body and rubbing me with a towel because I was kind of numb. And I was bare-ass naked. And these, later on, these are women who had never seen their husbands naked. And as I kind of regained my composure and became aware of, for instance, the nubile character of the young woman that was working on me, with obvious proof that I was aware of her presence, they screeched and ran away.
In the community that I grew up in, the vets were the mythological heroes. They really were like Perseus and the Golden Fleece and Hercules and the 12 Labors. They were the men who fought and did the right thing before the rest of the world, and they stood alone and they were vilified and reviled and all the things that heroes are meant to be.
If one is to ask me, why does a pacifist, because I was very anti-war, why and when does a pacifist go to war? And the answer to that for myself personally is when there's absolutely no alternative available to stop a menace which, if it succeeded, would obliterate all of our liberties and all of our human values.
To be a premature anti-fascist in my house was the be-all and end-all. It meant that you not only stood up against evil, you stood up first.
There was no way in the world I could resist going to Spain without losing self-respect, without feeling that when it came to the test, my conduct was not in keeping with my thoughts and my words, my public words. I made a film, a personal memoir for me of the Spanish Civil War called Dreams and Nightmares. Can you imagine my surprise when this film went on to win all sorts of international prizes?
When I first heard about the Spanish Civil War, I sort of sympathized with the Republican or the Loyalist side, but it didn't enter my head to go to fight. But before too long, it became apparent that Hitler and Mussolini had joined that war on the side of Franco, and that it was no longer a question of a simple civil war between Spaniards. Hitler was the epitome of all the things I've been fighting against all my life. And to become involved in Spain was just another step in the direction which my life had been going.
These are German airplanes dropping bombs on Guernica. The first thing that alerted the world to the potential of the war which is starting and which will develop in a full-blown conflict. Among the greatest sufferers were the children of Spain, who suffered malnutrition, inadequate medical care, not to mention the horrors for children of aerial bombardment. When things got really bad, when it looked there was a good possibility that we were going to lose the war, tens of thousands, if not more, children were sent off to live in Russia, France, Mexico. Heartbreaking scenes of the parents putting them on board trains, and every parent there knew that the chances were they would never see their children again. And they didn't. 45,000 guys came from 52 different countries to fight for the Spanish Republic, willing to give up their lives for a principle. That had never happened before, and it has never happened since.
Here was a people, almost a whole people, practically alone. They were withstanding the onslaught of world fascism at that time. They had been abandoned by their sister democracies, England and France and our own country. Nevertheless, they resisted, not just for Spain, but for all of us, for 3 years. They paid an enormous price, and the glory, and that's the best word I can choose, that was the Spanish people at that time, still shines for me. And their defeat, that enormous tragedy, a tragedy for all of us, still is an active wound in my heart.
We were on a train, the kind of train you see in a movie Western, a wooden box train. A group of us soldiers, we were going up to the front. The mood was very sad because we knew that tomorrow or the next day, half of us would be dead or wounded. It's a very depressing thought, even for big, brave volunteers, very depressing thought. I devised a game. We built a little fire, broke off wood from the train. We sat and put our little containers of wine and stuff around, and my idea was, you will sing songs, we call them songs your mother taught you, out of your ethnic background. So people sang Finnish songs and Irish songs and French songs, and I sang Jewish and Russian songs. So since the rules of the game were when you finished singing, people would applaud. As long as the applause lasted, you could glug, 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 as long as you wanted. Need I tell you that the applause was thunderous and long and prolonged. And I, who was not a drinker, was drinking rotten wine and rum like crazy. Suddenly, everybody was jumping out of the train and running into the fields. And I kept yelling, you sons of bitches, what's happening? Where are you going? Come on. They said, Abe, get going, get your ass out of there. I didn't see any reason to get my ass out of there. I stuck my head out of the train, took a look, and there were 3 specks coming down the railroad track. 3 fighter bombers they were, German fighter bombers. So I went to where we had our arms. I picked up a light machine gun. I didn't step out of the boxcar. I fell out. It didn't hurt. I sort of climbed up the iron little staircase that always leads to the top of one of these Western picture boxcars, placed my gun in position, opened the bipod, and waited. They had circled once and thrown some bombs already. Now they were coming down, and they were strafing. And I remember chips of wood flying all around me, but I held on, and I had this guy in my sights. He was dead. I had him dead in my sights. Pulled the trigger, no fucking ammunition. I think the first thing I did was to shit my pants. But the next thing I did is I took a tremendous leap from the top of the train, and I by far beat the world's record for the broad jump. Part of that story is true. You figure it out. Of course, the thing that never leaves, that's with you all the time, on and off, is fear. Terrible fear that you're going to get bumped off or mutilated. And one of the biggest problems is how do you function, how do you operate, overcoming this fear, because the body does not want to go. Any infantry soldier that tells you that he did not experience fear and panic in the face of enemy fire is either lying or a psychopath. And we had some of both, even the Lincoln Brigade. Right after I was wounded, I experienced a great deal of fear because I was out in no man's land. But finally, some guys come out and picked me up and put me in an ambulance, and as the ambulance rolled away from the front, I remember this almost feeling of elation. I'm going to survive this son of a bitch. I didn't feel good about having that feeling, but I had that feeling. I was glad to be out, safe. Most people, whether they agree or don't agree with what we did going to Spain, view us as very courageous people in any case. I don't see it that way at all. I think a single mom raising a couple of kids has more courage than anybody that went to Spain. Ultimately, what's courage all about? Courage is a matter of choices. Courage is a matter when you come up against a difficulty in life, where either fork in the road is a very painful one. Courage consists of choosing that fork in the road, which is not immediately gratifying, which doesn't give you more money, more pay, or tenure in academia. Courage is taking action, which is in conformity with that about you which you value most, which is your sense of idealism, which is your sense of right and wrong.
Abe has been married 4 times. The way I met him was, I had my workshop in the basement, and Abe came down, this big burly guy, and the first thing he does is, looks around and says, "You can't work in this place, there are too many posts here. Why don't we take a couple of these posts out?" And I was kind of, can't do that. I mean, the house will fall down. I said, bullshit, the house won't fall down. I'll show you. So he got a sledgehammer, and he sledged out one post. And then he sledged another one, and I was like, I don't know about this guy. What's he doing to my house?
So I wrote her a letter, 2 letters, 3 letters, and then the letters began to come from her, like every day.
And the thing, how do you say, ignited?
When I was young, I used to get into argument with people who were very religious. I don't do that anymore, except fun. I can be fun. I can say to a guy, to end the discussion, if he has a sense of humor, we're in agreement. We both believe in the Big Bang theory of creation. You believe the Big Bang took place 6,000 years ago, when Adam banged Eve. And I believe the Big Bang took place long before that.
Although this study of communist deception was made for a military audience, we think that you, the American public, will also find it pertinent and enlightening.
In World War II, I was delayed from going into action because of an Army policy of distrust of veteran Abraham Lincoln Brigade. I was a known communist in my unit, so my military career in World War II was very limited. Before my records caught up with me, they made me a sergeant. But what began to happen was a pattern of obvious discrimination. I remember them saying to me, "They're on to you. This is Washington talking."
There is no doubt as to where a real communist loyalty rests, an evil and malignant way of life. It reveals a condition akin to disease that spreads like an epidemic, and like an epidemic, a quarantine is necessary to keep it from infecting this nation.
A hierarchy of oppression that just used the whole communist brand as a way in which to obliterate all else. And I think Abe knew that. Because when they got through making communism an acceptable part of the social menu, they then moved right on to talk about liberals, and they moved right on to talk about Democrats, and they moved on to just catch everything in its wake.
That fighting Marine from Wisconsin, whom I now present to this convention, the Honorable Joseph McCarthy. And even if there were only one communist in the State Department, even if there were only one communist in the State Department, that would still be one communist too many.
At the time of McCarthyism, guys like Abe became a prime target.
If you were a communist, you had to register as a foreign agent, and we refused to do that.
McCarthy's mission was to not only diminish the images of those people, but to destroy them by whatever means possible.
Seized by FBI agents in a High Sierra hideout, 4 Communist Party members are arraigned in San Francisco. 2 of them are fugitives from the law, hidden by the Red Underground workers.
I was fortunate to be told through a leak that I was probably going to be picked up in a few days, and I chose to take off and become underground. Every 6 months, I changed my identity, the way in which I was making a living, my geography, and that for 3 years I saw no close member of my family, no close colleagues or friends. I was another person. They were very rough years for me. I suffered a lot of loneliness. There were times in which I was ready to give up so I could go to jail, at least be with some of my friends and comrades. On the other hand, I learned a lot of things about people. I also learned some skills I never had. I went skiing for the first time in my life. I rode horses for the first time in my life. I did a lot of things for the first time in my life. Before that, I was too busy saving the world 7 days a week. I was corresponding with 2 Jewish writers in the Soviet Union, and suddenly the correspondence ceased, just like that. So I knew that what people had been saying for a long time was true, that my friends were probably liquidated, and it happened to turn out to be the case. And then Khrushchev made his speech in '56, detailing the horrors of Stalinism. And my reaction to that was, the very same radicalism and humanism which brought me into the Communist Party made it necessary for me to leave the Communist Party because I no longer could escape what was staring me in the face, that they were no longer either radical or humanist. You can imagine what it was like when I got up in front of a convention in 1956. I felt I had to explain why I was leading the Communist Party, and I stood up there with tears in my eyes, saying how, with enormous reluctance, I no longer could go on being a member of such an organization. One of my closest buddies from Spain, absolutely close buddy, walked up, spit in my face, and said, "You have abandoned the working class. You've become an enemy of the working class." By the way, in passing, this guy never worked, but that's another matter.
He started telling stories. And I fell badly in love. I mean, I fell in love from the very beginning. I mean, this guy was just something else. I was in my 40s, he was in his 60s, and I thought he was super sexy.
Hello, Abe.
Hello, dear. Would you like a few chosen words for the occasion? My headdress is standing right behind you.
Yeah.
World famous for this kind of work. For 50 years or more, I made my living working as a carpenter. My great-grandfather was a carpenter. My grandfather was a carpenter. My father was a carpenter. I'm a carpenter. 2 of my sons are carpenter, and my wife is a very skilled carpenter. There must be some wood in the genes. To come to a pile of wood in the morning and leave that evening and see the skeletal outline of a small house. I mean, it's incredibly exciting is the word. If it were up to me, I would stop construction when the house is just framed out because it's a beautiful piece of sculpture. The other thing about the trade that I loved is that it left me free to think. It left me free to do other things. I was a very skilled carpenter. I made a good living, able to support my kids and family and so forth. And all of the rest of the time was mine. When I left the Communist Party in '56 and came to California, I was an old, experienced, radical activist looking for a cause, because I've been in causes all my life. I went from 7-day-a-week activity to what am I going to do now? And finally, I began to nibble away at work in the community I lived in, which was Venice. And I did some meaningful work there. As a matter of fact, I became known as the unofficial mayor of Venice, California. People came to me with all kinds of problems, including addiction and so forth, but it wasn't enough. I felt like I was nibbling at the fringes. So when the Freedom Summer was announced in the early spring of '64, I said, this is it. I got to get involved with this. I left behind me, with the agreement of my wife, by the way, kids who ranged in age when I left from 6 months to 4 or 5 years. So I went down to Mississippi and I met with Bob Moses, who was a saint, an incredibly beautiful human being, who was running that Freedom Summer campaign. So he took me out to 3 different places. And when I came to Malston, Mississippi, this tiny crossroads, that's what it was, I said, this is a good place because I think I can accomplish my objective. These were black farmers, independent, very small farmers, who, while they're generally nonviolent, all carried guns and defended themselves when they were attacked. And I said, well, if I'm going to build a center, at least I'd like it to have some kind of lifespan. I went into a rural community where they had a reasonable movement going, but there was no place where the movement could even get together, and built a community center with a kitchen that would serve various kinds of affairs, where they could launch a Head Start program for the kids. We had a movie projector, and so many people saw movies for the first time in their lives. And we had a health clinic with a doctor coming in from Jackson once a week, and nurses coming in twice a week. Many thousands of blacks, young blacks in particular, for the first time had the experience of a warm, loving, smiling white face, if I can put it that way. They had never experienced that. They didn't know what that was. They didn't know that there were white people who cared.
I think Abe's vision for why it was so critical was because in the place in which he served, down in the South, where race was the most severe in its distance one from the other, and in the punishment one to the other, I think he saw it as an important place to put a seed and nourish that seed so it would grow into a vast harvest for America's future.
I loved what I was doing. I entered a world that very few white people have an opportunity. I lived in the black world, inside a black world. I lived with the most militant black in Mississippi. This guy was really tough, Hartman Turnbull. I remember coming to his house. His first question to me was, are you good with a gun? And I said, pretty good. He says, welcome into my home. And during the time I lived with him there, we were attacked 18, 20 times at night, and the little wood shack was perforated with bullets. He used to laugh and say, I got the best air-conditioned house in Mississippi. There was something about Mississippi that was scary as shit. The moment it got dark, I felt surrounded by this incredible menace, is the only way I could describe it.
The greatest presence of danger to any of us were among those whites who were considered to be class traitors. I think a lot of white people paid a great price just because they were white.
The first day I arrived in Mississippi, that night, the car in which I arrived, there's a picture out on the wall of that car, was bombed, blown up, destroyed. This is my first day in Mississippi. My car's been firebombed, and there's been a sign on an adjacent tree saying, white nigger, go home. This is my last day in Mississippi, and I'm saying goodbye to the people in the movement with whom I've been working. Shortly before I got up to deliver what they call a sermon, the local minister got up and delivered the following. I know you've all been wondering what Mr. Abe doing down here in Mississippi. You all been thinking maybe he come down here He's a contractor to make himself some money. But I'm going to tell you the real story. This is not the first time the good Lord done send a carpenter down to help the poor folks of Mississippi.
I think America needed to know that in its ranks sat white people who did the things that those noble, courageous white people did who came south. Black people were perhaps the greatest beneficiaries of what their commitment was specifically about. But all of America thrived on seeing white Americans, their neighbors, people who looked like them, people who sounded like them from the white world, doing what they did.
One day, Abe is cooking our dinner in the kitchen. And I'm out back chopping wood. And my mother looks very thoughtful and she says, "It's really amazing. Everybody should have a husband like you and a wife like Abe."
Just let a smile be your umbrella on a rainy Seattle day.
We have a totally shared household. Abe is doing all the typical women chores. He does the cooking, he does the shopping, he does the laundry. I don't trust him with the cleaning. I do all the fixing in the house, fixing the plumbing, fixing the whatever comes up.
Donald is a remarkable carpenter. Sometimes I think it's no accident that I chose a woodworker as my final mate. Activism is sort of a path of life. I don't trust activism that's just good for the masses but not good for the activists. I have no use for martyrs. I have no use for people who think it's an enormous sacrifice to go out and be helpful to other people. I also have learned from experience that such people don't last very long. When I went to work in Mississippi and I was away the best part of a year on and off, I left behind 3 children with my 3rd wife.
I thought he was Spanish because I always heard him talking about the Spanish Civil War. I didn't really understand as a little girl what the Spanish Civil War was or what it meant, and kind of wondered why we didn't speak Spanish, and he was just my dad.
They're not activists in the same sense I am, and I can understand why. I think the central reason is that my own activism was so intense and so obsessional that there were times in life when they felt deprived of my attention.
Well, I guess as a child, you don't necessarily feel that you have your parents' interests, that you've ever even, I think I was well into my adult life before I realized that, you know, that he had respect for me and that he understood me and that we knew each other and connected. I didn't have that experience always as a child. He was a bit larger than life, and sometimes I just wanted a normal, everyday dad.
We were a family at first, so that was fun. Then, you know, when they broke up when I was about 10 or 11, and that was a real traumatic thing. My mom and dad arguing, him shouting real loud, her shouting back.
He ruined pretty much every romantic relationship he ever had. He was kind of a compulsive philanderer, I guess is the right way to put it.
He got a lot of attention from men that admired him and women that admired him, and he was very drawn towards that attention, and it took all different shapes and forms, and it would have been pretty much impossible for any woman on the face of the earth to have a healthy marriage with him. I remember that he made a commitment to stay in Venice and to be near us all while we grew up, and I guess I do appreciate that.
I do remember having a good time with him. He was real playful. He wasn't serious or something.
He was like a kid himself, so with little kids it's easy for him because he could just play around and be goofy and do fun little kid stuff. He's like a better dad when you're little. go-karts or boats in the canals, dirt bikes, and riding. There was a lot of open space back then in Venice. It was kind of semi-rural. Beaches right there. It was a paradise for kids at that time. The canals were empty lots, half of it. So you could just run in and out anywhere.
I'm thankful because I had a beautiful childhood, and I realize now that a lot of what I got to experience was because my papa knew we had something good here, and he worked hard to preserve it.
I grew up like other people, hearing again and again, come on, Abe, you can't be City Hall. Well, there are times when you can be City Hall. We beat City Hall in winning a children's park in Venice. We got the park as a result of a political struggle that was going on here between the politicians. And one of them promised me that if I threw support her way, which was enough to get her elected, she would guarantee us the 2 lots for a park. So I proceeded, kept my word. We elected her city council. She did not keep her word. One night, I and a group of my construction workers put together a park off-site and delivered it to those lots and set it up. The next morning, kids were on the swings, kids are sliding down the slides. It was a beautiful sight to see. Went on for a couple of weeks. A friendly policeman comes and tells me they're coming to bust up the park. It's illegal, no engineering, no plans, you didn't file for permits. And sure enough, the wrecking crew show up with enormous rigs, and we have a picket line of mothers surrounding the little park, and it's a standoff. They moved in, picked up my 6 comrades who were laid out in classical nonviolent position. I demonstratively lashed myself to a railing of the park and threw the key into the canals. First getting away the kids who surrounded me like a protective guard. The cop had to come and cut me loose. And they hauled us off to jail. Well, I knew we had him on a run.
I remember them putting handcuffs on him and taking him to jail, and I feel like I remember that my brother Dev wanted to go with him.
Cop comes up and he goes, "Do you want to go to jail?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm going to jail." And Abe said, "No, you're not, man. You got to go home. Your mom's going to kill me, man, if I let you go in." You know.
I mean, it was scary to me, but I knew he'd been to jail before that, and that wasn't like something that was a totally foreign concept that might be associated with my dad, so, I mean.
I think he was super important in that because there weren't other people that had that kind of political experience, how to organize people, how to play the media, what kind of pressure to bring, and how to set it up.
When he put me in a paddy wagon, I turned to my comrades and I said, "We got a park." They said, "What the fuck you talking about? What we got is we're gonna face a rat." I said, "No, you schmuck. We got a park. I'll show you." So we take us away to the jail. We go into a hearing room with the assistant prosecutor, and we're sitting there looking at each other. And so I open up the discussion and I say to him, "Look, all deals are based on power. And I'm going to tell you what your power is, and then I'm going to tell you what my power is. Your power is to get me 30 days in the clink at most. My power is to end your political career right now and here as the guy who prosecuted people who were trying to help the poor children on the Venice canals. You will be known as the baby hater of Los Angeles." The guy blanches. He runs out to talk to his boss. He comes back. Okay, we'll drop 2 of the charges. How about just trespassing?" I said, "Shut up. You got to give me something." I said, "Okay, I got a proposal for you. These guys go scot-free. I'm willing to pay up to $50 because I got to go to work tomorrow. When it's settled, the whole case is expunged from the record. I have no record for him." He said, "Okay," and he agrees. We go in and tell the judge, and the judge accepts, the plea bargain, and I pay my $50, and we walk out, and my lefty comrade say, "You betrayed the cause. We should have gone all the way." I said, "Schmucks, we got a children's park for $50. Man, I can afford it. I'm going to work tomorrow. You guys don't work anyhow." It was, Venice hippies. The next Monday, a resolution is passed providing 2 lots, and that the superintendent of construction, with materials furnished by the city, be the aforementioned Abe Osheroff. The lesson is very simple, that when you're dealing with power that's stronger than you are, your weapon is to embarrass them or to make their political careers a little more difficult. And we did it. I did it. And it worked. It worked like a charm. I make it a practice wherever possible to go shopping every day. One, because it gets me out of the house. And two, as you'll soon see, it provides me with excellent physical exercise because I use the shopping cart as a walker, and I walk a lot with it. Three, I prefer being in a good supermarket to going to an art museum. I like the colors better, and the textures better, and the smells better, and the sights better, and the people better. I never hear anybody walk up to some grapefruits and say, "Oh, that's so interesting," when they have nothing to say. Grapefruit's a grapefruit. My relationship with Vietnam was very extraordinary. I couldn't simply only participate in the anti-war movement which was going on with a refusal to serve and so forth. I respected kids who did that, of course I did. But I said to myself, what would a very decent German do when called upon to serve in Hitler's armies? And that was the code for me as to what I thought some people ought to do everything possible to bring about the defeat of the United States and Vietnam. Whatever it took. And I did not tell young people to avoid the draft, on the contrary.
When Abe talked to youth about performing subversive actions, I'm sure that what he was doing was convincing them that breaking the law and however you protest is the moral thing to do against a government that is performing immorally.
Colonel hears me talk like this, she has problems with it. You see, I believe if I look out that window and I see a guy attacking a young woman physically, or if I'm aware that somewhere out there a guy trying to rape a young woman, or if I look out and see a big guy beating up a kid, at any age, if I do not intervene, I pay an enormous price, me being who I am. Because nobody may know it, but I know that I failed to live up to a credo which has been a very important part of my life, which is that when you deal with evil, you are obligated to intervene.
I come from what my ex-mother-in-law calls socialist Sweden, which is not quite true. So I had a very similar political ideas that I did, but I wasn't raised in an environment where I thought anybody could do anything about it.
When I get this way, she says, "Why must you turn to violence?" I said, "I don't turn to violence. These people are revoking something in me." And I think that I got to her when I pointed out that one day, "Gunnar, you have the killer in you. You don't even know it. I'm safer than you are, because I know, and I can restrain that thought. But if you walked into a room and somebody were raping one of your daughters, and she immediately said, 'I'd kill a son of a bitch,' then there you are. There you are. And the difference is that I'm there more often than you are." It's the year 1970. And we get word from Spain that they're going to execute 16 young bastards. So we try to do what we can to, put some pressure to save their lives. And in Los Angeles, A couple of us got together. We decided that we'll picket the Spanish consulate on Wilshire Boulevard. So we show up and we picket Wilshire Boulevard. The traffic rolls. Nobody knows we're there. It's a waste of effort. How do you get publicity? And suddenly I get this genius of an idea. So I go and I get one of the young women that we have some connection with, and I say, I want you to call the Spanish consulate and tell them that on Thursday at noon, the whole place is gonna blow up. They're all gonna get blown to smithereens. So we show up in front of the Spanish consulate, and fire trucks come up, and the bomb squad comes up. The television crew guys come up to me and say, who's running this show? I said, I am. What about the bomb threat? I said, what bomb threat? There was a call about a bomb going off in the Spanish consulate. I don't know what the hell you guys are talking about, but I'll tell you what we're doing here. If what you're into is a goal that you're going to achieve, which will be the reward for your activity and other people's activities, if you need that, you're not really, in the deep sense of the word, a social activist. Because for a social activist, it's the path. It's actually the path towards something without any guarantees of fulfillment or victory.
The problems in Central America have the potential to affect our national security. Many of our citizens don't fully understand the seriousness of the situation. There is a war in Central America that is being fueled by the Soviets and the Cubans. They are operating from a base called Nicaragua. And this is the first real communist aggression on the American mainland.
I wanted to be in a position to tell Nicaraguans, some Nicaraguans, there is another America. We are not all Reagan assholes.
While the Sandinistas promise their people freedom, all they've done is replace the former dictatorship with their own.
I had deep sympathies for these young Sandinistas who came out of the hills and beat the shit out of Somoza, and I tried to think of a way that I could make a contribution that would resonate. I was able to sneak a top story into the Los Angeles Times, telling them that I knew a crazy old man who was going down deep inside the Contra country, where the Contras were very active, and even taking his 2 kids with him. The guy's nuts. The phone was ringing off the hook and people giving me money. So in '85, I went down to Nicaragua and I met with the top Sandinistas. I came with a plan for building a certain type of house, and they told me, no, we can't do that because it culturally doesn't fit into the ways in which our people think. I said, you give me a project to do, I'll do it your style. And they pumped one right at me. Said, we have a place really out in the boonies of a small cooperative, maybe 30 families. They live in the most miserable fucking conditions, bad water supply, no road access to get up there except a cow path up the mountain. Would you tackle that? And I said, that's just my cup of tea. So we went down there in the very early summer. My 2 boys and about 11 or 12 other young people. And we built 30 houses in about 60 days. They're not fancy. There was no glass, naturally. They were simple wooden structures, free from rain. It was a particularly wonderful experience to me having my own 2 boys there. Their attitude was, we didn't come here just to support Sandinistas. We don't buy everything that they're doing at all. We're here because of Reagan. That's what brought us here. And we're here because we enjoy the idea of helping, in a concrete way, particular people achieve a little bit better life.
The people were wonderful, just accepted us, but they seemed to understand our motivations.
The atmosphere was loving, even the men. The people in this village were armed to the teeth. And every night when we went to sleep, they had a running guard every night. Right after we left, the teacher who used to come up here to teach was slaughtered on his way up to the school. But not while we were there. They did not want to attack Americans.
The cooperative collapsed, and we might not have been able to prevent that, but I would have liked to have done a lot more. I would love if that was still going strong. That would be a great feeling for me to have helped them sustain that.
The one thing that's uniform about all three of my children is they're very decent people. They're what you call good people. There's not an exploitative bone in their bodies.
He taught us to be decent people and to be responsible for our actions and to think beyond our own belly buttons and to care about something greater than self, and I appreciate that. And as different as my brothers and I are, we all are very similar in our value system, and I think that's because my dad had such strong values, and my mom too.
Like most kids, not all, I grew up without a great self-image. I didn't get much input, for instance, from my parents, particularly my mother, telling me, you're a pretty good kid, I did get the idea, you're very smart, and you better get a good education. That's not what a kid was needing. What I was needing was to be told that I'm a very worthwhile person. And what I'm being told instead is, you will be worthwhile if you carried out the agenda I'm laying out for you. And then I addressed myself to that. I began to engage in the kind of activities which, if they worked, told me I was somebody. And I've engaged in a lot of activities in my life, and I have learned that I am very much somebody.
I was impressed at this tiger of a man, this man who had years on me and yet looked like he could far tear a passion to tatters than I could. And he, busy like a bee, once again, much older than me, but going here, lecturing there, I mean, filled, trying to establish this project, trying to establish this monument. I mean, he dazzled me.
After the tremendous successes I had with my film, well, the doors opened up all over the place. I spent a great deal of time going around the various campuses and groups of young people doing what most people would call passing the torch. That's not the way I see it. I think most young people have inside them some of a bit of a torch of idealism, anti-authoritarianism. It's a torch that needs to be lit. That's my job, lighting their torches, not handing them mine. I'm not going to hand them my torch because I'm still carrying it.
These days, it's all the more important to remind ourselves of how many different ways of defining what an American is, because there are very few people like Abe Osheroff.
You live in a world which alienates you from each other. Not only that, you live in a world which alienates you from yourself. By that I mean, everybody does some thinking once in a while, but we're real afraid to share that with other people because it might be costly or dangerous. It could end a beautiful affair to tell somebody the truth. You could lose a job by telling your boss the truth. You can get a bad grade from a professor by telling him he's full of shit. I tried to engage them, never to become observers of history, but always to be participants. There is a better way to live than the options which are given by the culture in which they live, in which success is measured by material things and power and the accumulation of wealth. I'm 86 years old. I have aches and pains and from heart and all that, but I still have more piss and vinegar than most of you. And in many ways, I'm the youngest person in this room because I never allowed the world in which I live to kill my spirit.
He's one of those speakers that you leave and you feel so excited and empowered, like you want to change the world or something.
His ideas on being politically active, his strategies for being politically active.
It's so great to hear that this isn't just like youthful idealism, that there are really people who went through their entire life still believing that you have to do what's right with yourself.
He just gives it to you the way it is in the raw.
Spoke to us on a level that wasn't like he was above us in his experience.
Teaching is is influencing eternity. Because a good teacher does not simply lay material into a container waiting to be filled. A good teacher passes on a way of thinking that has its own self-generation, that once it gets to another person, it doesn't come to a stop.
I was 24 when I first met Abe. The final exam was a trip to his apartment in Venice. I went there not knowing what to expect, but thinking that, you know, Abe must love me. I mean, I'm Italian. I told him how much of a communist I was, and before I opened my mouth, he pointed his big fat finger at me and said, "You are all personality and no character." I knew that I understood what he said. For him, I was just a spoiled brat. That's what I also believed about myself. And what he gave me with that critique was a sentence that I kept remembering all my life.
I did go see one of his classes at UCLA when I was in college, and he was pretty amazing. And I met some of the people that he mentored and saw what he meant to them.
Most of the kids I talked to in the universities loved me more unconditionally than my own kids, because they didn't suffer the other aspect of it.
I wouldn't call it jealousy, but it was an experience I had not had with him when I was a young person, so it was a bit strange. But I also respected him for it at the same time.
I didn't understand when I was younger that you don't engage in making the whole world a better place to live in and neglect to make your little world, your family, your friends, your wife, children, make that little world a better world to live in. I've been married 4 times, and if I may be light about it, I'm the working class answer to Elizabeth Taylor on the surface of it.
Abe just seemed to adore women and be completely oblivious to his age.
Here I was, past 75 years old, and this gorgeous creature is yumming for me. And I acted like a kid with the most luscious kind of an ice cream cone. I freaked out.
I think it's very difficult for a person with that kind of charisma and draw for other people to be faithful in their relationships. And we've had some real issues in that regard, Abe and I. And there has been times when I was ready to quit.
My lady began an examination of all my past little peccadillos. And she was seriously considering putting me out of the house.
If I'm going to be really honest about this, there were times when I really hated his guts.
I said to myself, you're going to be pushing 80, over 75. You're going to go out there and get a little hole in the wall and live alone. All your relationship to other people will be affected by this. People do that. What kind of life is that going to be? It'd be a shit-ass life.
I guess I finally decided, I mean, this is Abe, this is who he is. And I have to take the negative with the positive, or change it as much as I possibly can.
This woman is the first one who's ever confronted me with some of my faults and weaknesses. Almost all other women put up with my shit because they thought I was hot shit.
I made him face who he was. I made him face the fact that his private life didn't coincide with his public life.
And I learned more, by the way, in the last dozen years than I did in all the other years of marriage and relationships.
Most people, by the time they get into their 80s, are pretty set and stodgy, and he was sort of still so beautifully wide open, and he was able to look at himself and look at some things about his life and make some really profound changes.
I'm really glad they made it work. They were a good couple.
It's taken a lot of work to get to where we are now. We have a really wonderful, loving relationship.
We are each other's best friends. We're always there for each other in whatever way we can. Oh, the blueberries. Yeah. This is our blueberry field. This year was a high yield, 1 pint. I figured out if you figure labor at $5 an hour, fertilizer and all that, it costs $4 a blueberry. But oh, to have your own blueberry. I was telling you that the person that you last talked to is a very different person in very many basic ways from the person you're talking to now. The turning point being what happened September 11th in New York. Pretty difficult to do rational thinking when you're overwhelmed by emotionality. I didn't stop crying till a few days ago. My first reaction was extreme anger at those who perpetrated it, and a strong feeling of we got to get these guys and we got to bring them to justice. And that lasted for not too long, a period of time, because something else was creeping in. I examined the flags that were flying all over the neighborhood. I realized for the first time in my life that I came to the issue with incredibly deeply embedded prejudices. Underneath those patriotic flags, there beats many a decent heart. And I no longer feel a sort of contemptuous attitude towards the backward, ignorant American people. No matter what we do to explain, no past errors or mistakes, no past crimes can be used to justify the event that took place in New York City and Washington a few weeks ago. Nothing. We have to seek justice, but it has to be a justice that's free of vengeance. And any justice that's reached out for by vengeful means will only result in an intensification of the problem we already face. There's no way in the world we are going to bring terrorism to a halt without a fundamental sea change in the foundations out of which our foreign policy is rooted. You're beautiful. We stand at a crossroads in history, which, if not countered, will go down as the dark ages of this century. But we have something which the more you give of it, the more you have. And that's human love and compassion. My dear friend and comrade in the struggle, Ed Asner.
Good afternoon, Seattle, and greetings to my fellow patriots.
If we are to free ourselves from the fear of terrorism, we must free people all over the world from the fear of hunger, of indignity, and of a life without future. Whether that's possible, well, I've lived through a lot of dreams in my life which people thought were insane. Hello, it's time to stop the war in Iraq. It is time to bring our troops home.
Abe, from his throne, his immobile seat in his living room, which he rarely leaves, was able to come up with this really brilliant idea, the Peacemobile.
I urge you to contact your representatives and tell them it is time to bring the troops home.
It's a moving billboard, mobile sound system, video projection facilities. It's going to have everything necessary to really carry forward Abe's life work.
I feel very good about creating this thing. And I think young activists should learn something from it. That if you're really a dedicated activist, it never stops.
It is time to bring our troops home. In this senseless, stupid, and evil venture that we call the Iraq War.
And now I'd like to introduce you to a veteran of the Lincoln Brigade who came down here from Seattle, Washington, a lifelong activist, Abe Osheroff.
Many people consider going to Spain as simply a sacrifice. I'm not one of those. To me, being an activist has always been a special privilege. And it's a wonderful job. You never run out of work. You meet some of the nicest people. The pay is very high. Yes, it is. If you value the love and respect of the people you work with and know more than you do money and physical things, then the pay is very high. And that's why I'm able to say, at the ripe old age of pushing 93, that I've had a glorious life in many ways. There is this incredible feeling that the stuff we're made of never goes away. With or without monuments. Because the bastards will never cease their evil, and the decent human beings will never stop their struggle. And that's going down to the very basics. What the hell a monument's all about? Beside places for birds to deliver bird shit. And I'll share that feeling with you. I'll tell you what it's all about for me. Someday, in the not too distant future, some guy will be walking through here with a couple of his adolescent kids, and one of the kids will say, "Dad, what's that?" And this dad may know the answer. And giving that answer is like putting another spark plug into the vehicle of progress that we're all engaged in. I'm very happy to see you guys here, and I thank you on behalf of the veterans of Lincoln Brigade for making us immortal.
When I was younger, I was much more goal-oriented. You worked hard and you fought hard to achieve certain things. And that's not where I am anymore. I accept as a strong possibility that some of my fondest dreams will never take place, and certainly not in my lifetime. And I asked myself quite a while ago, why do you stay with this? And the thing that comes to mind, and I'll say it in both languages, is a short sentence from one of the most beautiful philosophic poets that I've ever run across, a Spanish poet named Antonio Machado, who said, "Caminante no hay camino, se hace camino al andar." Traveler, speaking philosophically, there is no road. The only real road is the one you make by walking. And that is pretty close to where I'm at. I don't know what the end of the thing, but I know it's a direction that I want to go. It's the direction I want to teach other people to go, and that the very process of going is in itself its own reward. Live a better life.